New York City, K2, or synthetic marijuana, it goes by a lot of other names too, was outlawed in October of 2015 after the city council voted to hit stores caught selling the product with fines ranging from $5,000 to $50,000. Now, along with the possibility of having their tobacco licenses revoked or their businesses completely shut down. And despite these efforts to control K2 commerce and consumption, the drug is gaining ground in the city. And since 2015, more than 8,000 synthetic drug-related ER visits and 2 confirmed deaths have been blamed on K2.
To give us the latest on both last week's frightening spike in Brooklyn and the new federal legislation being proposed by Senator Chuck Schumer, we want to welcome back DNAinfo New York. We're happy to see Noah Hurowitz again. The last time he was here, he was with the Brooklyn paper. Noah, good to see you. Thanks for being on BK Live.
Thanks for having me.
And Camille Bautista is a reporter and producer covering Bedford-Stuyvesant. Camille, thank you for being here. Thank you both for being on BK Live.
Thank you.
Let's start with the general question. What exactly is K2? I know it has different names like spice and synthetic marijuana, but what is it?
Okay, so essentially K2, like you said, it's a lot of different things. There's no one chemical that is K2 or spice or synthetic marijuana. It's a synthetic cannabinoid, which is a chemical designed to mimic the effect of THC on the brain. But it is not THC, and it doesn't have the same effects, really, as THC. And so basically what you see people smoking is manufacturers will make the chemicals and they will spray it on leaves or dried herbs or something.
Just grass clipping.
Anything really, yeah, anything that'll burn.
So Camille, this isn't something that you just like cook up like one of these meth labs. You essentially have to have a chemistry degree to get cracking with this stuff.
I mean, not necessarily. The health commissioner has said in the past that you imagine when someone is manufacturing K2 that people are in labs and they're spraying these chemicals, but it's more likely a scenario where someone is in a back room or a warehouse spraying these chemicals on these dried leaves that many have said are imported from China.
So I want to know, how does K2 get into the bodegas in Bed-Stuy, where it's being sold reportedly?
Well, if we can tell anything by busts that have been made in the last year or so, there's been a lot of busts in the Bronx of big shipments of K2. And so what it seems like is they ship it to somewhere, the Bronx, anywhere there's a warehouse really, and break it up, spray it on the leaves, put it into packets, and then they distribute it to bodegas that are willing to sell it. Which I think is fewer now.
Yeah. So this is something that came from your site, that the police raided 5 bodegas in Brooklyn just on Wednesday, and a day after the suspected overdoses from K2 happened, when the 33 people went to the hospital, but they weren't able to find the stuff.
Right. So they arrested 2 people for untaxed cigarettes and forged stamps, but they didn't find any K2.
So they come in looking for K2, and then they just fine you for every other thing they can find if your refrigerator wasn't cold enough.
Right. And then those 2 delis that people have said, users and police have also said in the past that they're, they're hot spots. There are 2 delis. There's Big Boy Deli, and there's also a smoke shop that's next door that people have dubbed the epicenter of, where these things are coming from. And, reports even say, and some users have said that they're making it on site.
Oh, wow.
At one of these locations. But the police in that precinct have mentioned in the past that they have targeted these locations, and there are civil court proceedings in process to, get it going to shut them down.
It would seem to me as though you should be quick to shut them down, right? Because they're, selling illegal drugs out of their bodegas. I mean, how long of a process is that? Is that just up to the legal system as to whether or not these delis selling K2 get shut down?
I think that part of what the legislation last October was meant to do was to make it easier to shut down a bodega selling it, because previously it was just the clerk would be fined, or the clerk who was caught selling it would be individually fined or potentially jailed. It was a violation. Now it's a misdemeanor. Now they can go after the business under the city's nuisance abatement law. which allows them to find the store, and then under the third piece of legislation, they can actually, like you said, take away the cigarette license.
So let's talk about the fact that a nuisance abatement, the fact that it is a nuisance. Describe to me that scene. I read that you were talking about like coming down the stairs from the J train, smelling this smell in the air and what you see.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. I mean, that area has been a hotspot, I guess, just for a lot of, it's the intersection of Myrtle and Broadway. So this is the border of Bushwick and Bedford-Stuyvesant. And K2 use has not only been in Bedford-Stuyvesant, but in previous years, people have complained about it in Williamsburg and Bushwick. There was a task force created by politicians and city agencies to kind of combat this before, but the J train is right above, so you have that covered elevated train, and there's also a methadone clinic that's there, and also several homeless shelters that are within that surrounding area.
Perfect storm.
Right, exactly. People have called it the perfect storm, and people have described that when you walk there, you just smell this chemical aroma, and there's a lot of panhandling that's been going on there in the past that has increased according to residents, and use is spilling over into residential areas as well, not just that commercial corridor, but neighboring blocks.
But Noah, this is a drug that a few years ago, you might remember Miley Cyrus is like, oh, smoking spice or K2. It's not real weed, y'all, so you can do it. But now they've securely found a population of users in homeless folks.
Yeah, I think that one of the big reasons that I've heard users have told me, and I've heard anecdotally in other news reports, is that it doesn't show up on a drug test. So you got people who may be on parole or probation who need to, pass a drug test, so they can't smoke pot. Right.
But it's not a lot of people going for jobs at Citibank who are like, oh, they're going to test my pee, so let me go get some K2.
It's probably not.
Yeah.
They're probably not going to do that. But, it's vulnerable populations who have substance abuse problems who are going to be more risky with the unknown substances that they smoke.
And experts have called it the poor man's marijuana. And some people say that they use it because the high is so much stronger, but lasts for a short period of time. But other experts also say that the high could last as long as 4 days. And it's so easy to buy. Joints can cost as low as $1. So, I mean, the access is very easy there.
Wow.
How does this fit into the NYPD's war on drugs, so to speak, and the way that they interact with homeless people? I know that's a general question, but can you answer that?
One thing that I did a story last year, last September, October, about this one block of West 25th Street in Chelsea, right next to this shelter called the BRC shelter. And that block is part of the 13th precinct, and it had half of all of the K2 arrests in the whole precinct, for like a month period that I saw. Since I wrote that story, I haven't seen a single arrest on that block, which is curious. So I'm not really sure exactly how yeah, right. So I think that the NYPD has certainly shifted towards going after bodegas, and it's possible that I don't know what their policy is for if they find it on someone, if they're referring it to substance abuse counselors or what. But I think one thing that a lot of people have brought up with all of the health problems with K2 is that you have Bill Bratton up there saying this isn't marijuana, and making a clear distinction between marijuana. It sounds like pot might be healthier. I'm not going to tell people what to do. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a social worker. But it sounds like a lot of drug legalization advocates have said, if there wasn't such a high stigma for smoking this measurably safer thing, people wouldn't be smoking K2. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, some people are saying
we got
that.
No one's coming after you.
So is back to the sort of the way that it's the drug of choice for homeless people is cheaper than a can of Coke or something if you can get one joint. Are we steering people towards treatment, or are people just being locked up and criminalized because of their use in that sort of dope fiend lean thing that they're doing underneath the train tracks now?
Well, police have said that what makes this pretty difficult for them to kind of hamper down on is the fact that it's a violation. People are issued summonses if they're found with it. And, really, they're their hands are kind of tied.
It's not technically illegal to possess it.
Exactly.
Right?
And what we've seen in Bed-Stuy and Bushwick on that border was these people were treated, I don't really know if they were given summonses, but the next day you see them back right on the street with their hospital tags looking for the next joint of K2 to smoke.
Yeah.
And experts have said that the way to target this is through treatment centers and through dealing with the root of the problem, which is people with addiction and substance abuse, that sort of thing, instead of focusing so much on whether it's decriminalization or that aspect.
So if you cure homelessness, do you think we can cure the K2 then?
Well,
is that the...
Well, what's interesting also is that the demand is always going to be there. We also see that in Harlem, where this epidemic was present in 2015.
Right.
And after the Bed-Stuy thing happened, people were saying that those bodegas have cleaned up and people don't really see use over there. And you can attribute that to, police presence and them cracking down, that sort of thing. But the demand is still there. People are still going into those bodegas and asking, but the sellers say that they don't have it, or the owners say they don't have it, and the same thing in Bed-Stuy.
Why hasn't it made it to the street then? Like, why aren't there street level dealers? Like, you can buy pot anywhere on the street. Why is K2 like the official bad drug of a bodega?
I've heard anecdotally that there are people selling it on the street.
Yeah.
People who might have a connection to a further away bodega that sells it further away from like the hot spot. But I was on West 25th Street last week actually after the Bed-Stuy thing to see if it was still a problem. And I spoke to one woman who worked in a store near sort of where a lot of those guys gather. Yeah. And she was saying, she sees hand-to-hand.
Really?
She sees people like exchanging packets, not all the time,
right.
but enough that she has noticed people doing hand-to-hand stuff.
Seems like the margins would be so low if a joint is $1 and you got to deal with the guy who gives you 100 pennies.
Right. I mean, I would imagine it's not professional dealers slinging. I would imagine that it's people buying it and bringing it and distributing it.
Camille, you mentioned the residents in Bed-Stuy and adjacent to Myrtle and Broadway there. How are they, if at all, are they reacting against this? Because clearly you don't want zombies of any sort wandering your blocks.
Right. Well, the first instance that I heard about it on the Bed-Stuy side was this past June, before all of, the explosion happened, so to say. And residents were complaining to the precinct council, saying that for the past couple of months, for the past year or so, that they've seen an increase in, just people like laid out in front of their lawns, or people in community gardens smoking, where children are around. So there's been a concerted effort on the residents' parts to call 911 if they have to, or call police. And then in those instances, they've said that there has been a ramped up police presence in their area, but it only lasts for so long. And then you do see, once police are there, they'll migrate elsewhere. But there is news that there is a task force that may be reassembled, or in the past, that could be a solution as well, with elected officials and city agencies working together to kind of combat this.
And this is a police stop of presumably someone who was under the influence of K2. Just before we get out of here, how are the municipalities dealing with this? Are there problems anywhere else around the country, or is New York sort of the epicenter of this K2 business?
Well, like we were saying, you shut down a hot spot, there's always going to be a demand for it. Just this week in Rochester, upstate, there was 100 or so packets seized of K2. So we are seeing it in New York State, and there has been legislation from Chuck Schumer. He earlier this week had announced that he wanted to crack down on it by banning certain chemicals that were in it. So we're seeing some response from legislative officials, but it's just to be determined whether or not it's going to be effective.
Right. Mitch, Camille, thank you very much. DNAinfo New York. We ran out of time. We wanted to talk about your other hot scoops. We'll just have to have you back, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You.
Great job, guys.